Welcome back. It's exactly 9:40 a.m. News and views on Salam Media, and our next guest is Guy Martin. He is the editor at DefenceWeb, and we're going to be looking at Ramaphosa's leadership being questioned due to South African deaths in the DRC. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Okay, lots of comment regarding the situation of our troops going to the DRC. Julius Malema is claiming that they're not well trained, and they're going to be they're being set up for failure and obviously killings as well. We've had a couple of issues over the past few years, even during the time of COVID, where the inefficiencies and incompetencies seem to have made the headlines. Your thoughts?
I think to say that the SANDF are poorly trained is quite unfair. Whenever they deploy to the DRC, for example, our troops undergo jungle warfare training. This takes place both in South Africa and in the DRC. And Brazilian soldiers who have lots of experience with jungle warfare operations, they've been responsible for training some of our soldiers in country. So while the SANDF is poorly funded and overstretched, our soldiers are still quite competent and they are quite well trained. Yes, we do see the odd case coming up in the media where, for instance, during the COVID lockdown, civilians were being assaulted. But one must keep in mind that in those sort of situations, soldiers aren't meant to, they're not trained to be police. They shouldn't be deployed really in those roles. Whereas sending soldiers to the DRC to fight rebels, that's what they're trained for and that's what they should be used for.
So you're the editor at DefenceWeb. Tell us about DefenceWeb. What sort of information do you collate and put out? And then we also have another huge issue as far as our country is concerned regarding our very porous borders. Should that not be a role that the SANDF should be fulfilling? Because if you say yes, then we have a huge problem, don't we, with illegal immigration on the rise, rapid rise, might I add.
Indeed. So just briefly, DefenceWeb, we were established in 2008 and we cover military matters across Africa. Our main focus is on South Africa and the SA National Defence Force, but we also look at conflict and security across Africa. So to answer your question about our borders, we do have approximately 2,700 soldiers on border protection duty. And these took over from the police. So for a number of years now, soldiers are responsible for patrolling the borders with our neighbors. And they are fairly successful. Every month they apprehend thousands of illegal immigrants. They confiscate millions of rands worth of contraband, of drugs. They seize stolen firearms and recover vehicles that are trying to be smuggled out, particularly to Mozambique. So the SANDF, this is one of many deployments that they've been asked to undertake. There are about 1,000 troops in the DRC with the UN mission there, a similar number with the SADC mission in Mozambique. We've also got soldiers protecting ESCOM infrastructure, and nearly 3,000 soldiers are assisting the police in combating the Zamazamas or the illegal miners. So the SANDF are extremely busy and it's too much for them to handle. Given the limited resources and the limited budget that they have, they can't do all these missions well. And what we're seeing in the DRC is that the forces we have up there are completely insufficient and not well equipped enough to combat M23 rebels up there. The SANDF does not have enough logistics capability. We don't have enough air support. We've got no serviceable attack helicopters in the DRC, and this is going to leave us extremely vulnerable. The United Nations had about 20,000 troops in the DRC, and in the last couple of decades that they've been there, they've failed to bring peace to that country. And this is one of the reasons why the DRC government wanted the UN forces to leave. Similarly, they also asked the East African forces last year to leave the DRC because they weren't having much success either. So with the SADC mission in the DRC will have about 5,000 troops. And that's a quarter of what the UN had. If the UN couldn't succeed with 4 times that number, it's highly unlikely that the SAMI DRC force will be able to succeed, especially when they don't have enough air support and logistics. So,
Guy, aren't we as a country then sending these 5,000 SNDF soldiers on really, to put it very harshly, a suicide mission? Because we've just heard about 2 or 3 of them being killed over the past few days. Julius Malema and other political party members have been making big noises about it. You've also indicated, and so says Julius Malema, that there isn't enough funding regarding equipment and equipping our soldiers well enough to be able to, never mind protect other territories, but to protect themselves.
Yes, so I think it is, from the South African government's perspective, it is a noble cause to go into the DRC and to want to bring stability, because that's to South Africa's advantage. And we don't want instability creeping down south. We don't want to see mass migration because of conflict in the DRC. We want to preserve our trade ties with the DRC. But what we're doing is we're going about it wrong. We are committing forces, but not enough to make a difference. We're doing a half job, and I don't think it will be effective. And the bottom line is that we will probably see more soldiers being killed.
Oh, and I guess on the part of the South African government, it is really a show of solidarity, is it not? Because if they pull back their troops, the DRC will read the situation quite incorrectly, thinking that we don't want to support them in their efforts to keep their country safe. The other thing as well is you talked about our soldiers being deployed to the border posts to protect the country from illegal immigration. You've also talked about them assisting the police regarding the Zamazama issue and a whole lot more. How come we South African civilians are not aware of all of that? Is it intentional on the part of the government not to put out such information? Because I think that if more people knew about it, they'd feel a little more comforted knowing that the government is working in the best interests of South African citizens.
So the SANDF, in recent years, they've got much better at communicating what they do and their successes. Unfortunately, a lot of that information doesn't make it into the mainstream media, and it's only specialist publications like DefenceWeb who really focus on this. I think this is part of the broader problem with shrinking newsrooms and the difficulty that the media has had as a whole. We have very few specialist defense reporters. So the SANDF, they are trying to communicate their successes, but there is this perception amongst the population that the military is something of a luxury and something we don't need. And a lot of people say, well, defense is just a waste of money to spend money on the military when we have more urgent requirements like healthcare and education and so forth. But in order to have a relatively stable and safe country, we need the military to look after, for instance, our borders, our seas, to stop illegal migration, to curb crime, to prevent illegal fishing, to ensure that also, for instance, across the border in Mozambique, that insurgency doesn't trickle over into South Africa. And those are all roles that the military carries out. And unfortunately, the military is a bit of a victim of its own success, because when they've been asked to fix roads and bridges, they've even been asked to help out with the sewage problem in the Vaal. Military healthcare practitioners have staffed hospitals during strikes. So there's a lot that the military does, but every time they're asked to do something, they pull a rabbit out of a hat, and with the limited funding and resources available, they go and do it. But what we're seeing now is that the SANDF is so badly overstretched that the wheels are starting to come off.
Mm.
And we saw that in the DRC earlier this month, when one of our helicopters was hit 43 times by M23 rebel fire. This helicopter was busy carrying out a medical evacuation, and it didn't have the support of Roy Falk attack helicopters, and that left it vulnerable to rebel forces. So before, when the Air Force was better resourced and had more serviceable aircraft, it was standard procedure for Roy Falks to escort those Oryx transport helicopters and keep the rebels from even attempting to fire at our aircraft. And now that we're seeing that the Roy Falks are not serviceable due to problems at Denel and a lack of money in the Air Force, our aircraft and our soldiers are being more and more vulnerable. So unfortunately, the bad news is what really gets into the media, and I think at the way things are going, we are probably going to see more bad news coming along.
Sadly, not good news then at all. Let me just quickly end up by asking this question then. The DA Shadow Defence and Military Veterans Minister Cobus Murray has said in a statement, and I quote, "The blood of the fallen soldiers falls squarely on Ramaphosa's hands." He is not only referring, I presume, to the 3 soldiers that were killed recently, but going forward as well, I presume, is the assumption as well.
Yes, I think most experts agree that without air support and without larger troop numbers, without other SADC countries coming to the party, the South African mission to the DRC is not going to succeed, and more soldiers will die. So I think because Ramaphosa pushed this deployment through, and there was very little debate and discussion in Parliament, I think that assertion that Ramaphosa is responsible for those deaths of those soldiers, it holds some merit.
Guy, Martin, thank you indeed for your insights. I like what you've said. I like your explanation, because we here on the ground just make assumptions, jump to all of the wrong conclusions. And the one key thing that has come through for me regarding this discussion with you is that one of the key reasons for the government to send our troops to the DRC and other such places actually pushes back illegal immigration. And should there be huge problems in that particular country, maybe our SANDF can contain those immigrants from obviously infiltrating South Africa. And as it is, we're sitting with a huge immigration problem, illegal immigration. So it's always wonderful getting that perspective. We overlook all of that, and we now understand, or I certainly understand, the merit of the SANDF and the fact of why they get deployed to countries around, in and around South Africa. Thank you indeed for those insights. Go well, and God bless.
Thanks so much. You too.
It's exactly 9:54, news and views wrapping up. We have one more interview. We're waiting for our guest to join us, and we will be talking about the South African National Play-Based Learning Conference that is going to be happening soon.